cell phones are turned off. And next business I'd like to have an oral roll call, starting with John Roth up in the right corner there.
I'm here.
Caitlin,
Caitlin Mercer.
Mr. Anderson,
Joe Anderson here.
Mayor,
Linda Olson here.
Chuck Hobenick,
Here.
and Cheryl Wink.
Cheryl Wink here.
All right, and Peter is here.
Yep, I'm here.
All right. All right, the meeting is in order, and I need a motion for approval of the minutes for the May 12th Zoom meeting.
And I'll just interject quickly that John Moore is here as well. Just to get it on.
Sorry, John.
That's right.
We do have a quorum here, so we'll go. And I again need a motion for approval of the board meeting on May 12th.
So moved.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. Well, do we have anybody from the public that has requested to attend the meeting or speak to us so far?
No email, Mr. Wiggins, and I apologize. I was looking for Mr. Moore as an attendee. Could you please tell me who motioned the minutes and who seconded it?
I motioned.
Chuck
Yeah.
mentioned it, and I don't know who seconded.
I can second. Don Roth.
John Roth, second.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that's about the agenda so far. And the next thing, there is no new business. And there is old business that Peter would like to talk to us about the progress update on the preliminary result review. Is that correct, Peter?
That is correct. Before I do that, there's a couple new faces on the call today that I just wanted to introduce. So Jay Amoko is our new business support specialist in utilities. I think you're week 3, right, Jay?
Yes.
And so we are very excited to have Jay on board. She is definitely digging in and helping us with all of our utilities business processes, and it has been great to have her on board because it's allowed me to offload some very important business that had just been piling up on my desk. So it's great to have Jay here, and we're very excited. The other person on the call is Siwan Rao, and she is actually with Stantec. She is our consultant. So during today's presentation, there's going to be a point in time where I hand the control over to her, and she's going to walk us through the financial modeling software that Stantec has been working on. And so those are our 2 additional people that we have on the call today, and just wanted to make sure you knew who they were before we got going.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen. Make sure I got the right one. Okay. Okay, does everybody see a PowerPoint with a nice picture of a river?
That we do.
All right, perfect. So what we're going to talk about today is basically I want to give everybody a progress update of the work that's been done on the rate and fee study. And so if you recall, the process that we've been underway for just about a year now is, first we started with the master plan. The master plan, we talked about those results last meeting, and those results feed into a rate and fee study. The rate and fee study has been something that we've been working with Stantec consultants on since about February, and they take all that information as well as all of our existing utility billing information, and we're putting together a comprehensive analysis of our rates and fees and a financial plan to help us determine how we can fund those projects that are so important for us for the water and sewer system into the future. And so that's what we're going to go over today, is the progress on that project. We have a meeting with the full council on June 22nd to go over the preliminary results to get some direction. So this information is very current and hot off the presses. So we're still even working on the submittal for council, but this is the most up-to-date information we have. Let me make sure Hold on. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is first rate setting, the process by which we set rates, the components of a rate study, this rate and fee survey that we look at other rates and fees for other communities, and how we compare. We'll look at connection fees and the connectors, and then we'll spend most of our time in the cost of service and then the financial planning analysis piece. So really it comes down to, when we're setting rates for water and sewer, it comes down to three things. It's how much do we need? So we need to make sure that we create revenue sufficiency, and that's based on policy. It's based on the findings of the master plan, basically the needs of the utilities. Where does that funding come from? So that's we use industry accepted approaches through AWWA's manual M1 and WEF's manual for wastewater. We look at how to appropriately allocate those costs to each unit of service, so each individual customer. And then we look at how we can collect it. And so one of the things that we try to do is we try to make sure that we are stable in rates as much as we can, and that we keep them, that we balance affordability with needs of the system. And so that's really all the drivers that push how we set our rates. And so this is the scope for the rate and fee study that we initiated with Stantec in February. And you can see the tasks, tasks 1 through 9. And here's where we're at. So we've completed project initiation. We're in the process of a financial plan. We're in the process of developing cost of service, as well as rate development. The rate survey piece is completed, and you'll see that in a later slide. Analysis of our connector agreements, and so those are our sewer connector agreements with the other districts. Those, we're trying to create consistency among those and ensure that we're applying those appropriately across the connector districts. The connection fees, so this largely ties to the work that was done at South Platte Water Renewal Partners last year, where the cost of service analysis for the wastewater plant yielded projects that new growth in other communities, as well as in Englewood, will have to pay their fair share into those projects and into that existing infrastructure. And so establishing a good basis for those connection fees will ensure that we're actually capturing the revenue from not just the city of Englewood, but all those customers outside in the connector districts. Miscellaneous fees, those are like water shutoff fees and turn back on fees and late bill fees. So we're looking at all the potential miscellaneous fees. That's also happening. And then once the financial planning model is complete, they'll do training for us. It's a Excel-based program, so it's something that we can take in-house and then through training are able to use. It's actually consistent with the same modeling software that we used at South Platte Water Renewal Partners, and so the staff at the wastewater plant has been trained on this, and we'll further that training over to utilities in Englewood, and then finally a report. And so I talked about the rates and fees survey. So this is always interesting, and this gives you a cross section of rates across the Front Range. And I think what you can see is that Englewood's rates are lowest. So, and this is the water residential, and so this assumes 6,000 gallons of a monthly usage. And we use that as a baseline level because when you get into the irrigation season, it's really hard to do comparisons because it depends on other communities' water usage rate. But 6,000 is a pretty normal base usage rate. And so you can see Englewood's at $22.98. And then you can see there's a stretch in the middle that runs from about $30 to $46. And then you got a couple outliers, and those are communities to the south that really are funding their water systems now in a way that the large cost of these systems, if you're building them now, is really a significant cost to ratepayers, because fortunately for Englewood, you know, the systems were built out decades ago, and this is where, again, if you think about the Englewood forefathers who were thinking ahead as they developed the water system, this is why we don't have to build the system now at $100 a month like Roxborough. And so we do have that benefit, but I think you can see that the rates themselves are somewhat lagging across the just the Front Range. Sewer rates, very similar. We're not the lowest, we're second lowest. Littleton happens to be the lowest, but we're very close. And then again, you can see where everybody generally falls, with the most expensive being Parker Water and Sanitation District, which again is another high growth community that is investing in their infrastructure. So this is the combined bill. And so this is the combined monthly. So we bill quarterly right now, but we did a monthly comparison, so you can do an apples to apples comparison. And you can see the average for Englewood is $46.48, and the highest bill is Roxborough at $138.40. So that's a monthly bill. And so if you look where the average is, the average hovers just above 80. I think if you throw out the outliers of Parker, Castle Pines, and Roxborough, which again are those high growth communities, and just look at the more established communities across the Front Range, you can see how Englewood is comparing to Castle Rock, Aurora, Fort Collins, Lakewood, Denver, Longmont, Boulder. They're all in that 70, they're generally in that $70, $75 range per month for a combined bill. And so not only are we the lowest, but we're the lowest by $11 a month, which is a significant lag in terms of, you know, all these systems were built at the same time throughout the Front Range generally. And so if you look at the Denver system and the Aurora system and the Lakewood system, and you see the investment that they're putting in monthly in those $70 ranges, you can see where if we have kept rates too low for too long, we probably have not given the same level of investment into the system, which is largely what the master plan showed, which is we have some deteriorating systems. So it's one of the effects of keeping rates suppressed almost too low, is that you end up not keeping up with just the normal reinvestment that's required of a complicated water and wastewater system, and then you get behind. So these are connection fees. So connection fees, again, are those one-time investments into a system. And these, again, Englewood is the lowest by far in the Front Range. And some of that has to do with the fact that Englewood is not a growth community. And so if you look near the top, if you look at these areas, so especially these ones with these large gray bars, so Castle Pines, Parker, Fort Collins, Castle Rock. So the gray bar is because they're building out a completely parallel water system to their current water system. So those are communities that have often relied on deep basin aquifer groundwater from the Denver Basin Aquifer. Fort Collins is a little bit different, but generally in the Front Range, it's that deep basin aquifer. Well, the 2002 drought highlighted to growth communities that you can't just keep mining water because it's a non-renewable resource. And so those communities have all shifted to developing a renewable water resource, which means they're building a renewable water resource today. That's what Englewood actually did way back in the early 1900s, when it was much more affordable to do that. So the reason you don't see the large gray bar for a water resources fee in Englewood is because we have the established water system and really good water rights, senior water rights with a excellent water portfolio. And so we're fortunate in the sense that we don't have this hill or this mountain to climb in addition to the infrastructure. but it does give you a sense for why connection fees are so much more in those communities. They're high growth communities. That growth puts pressure on the system. They have to build more system, and you have to draw that tie. So connection fees can't pay for ongoing operation of a system. It has to be for new investment related to growth. And so that's why, even though Englewood's fees are really low, they're not going to go up tremendously. They're not going to rival Parker and Castle Pines, because it does have to have a tie to growth. And so hopefully that that illustrates the more nuanced complexity of this chart. This is just generally, again, how connection fees are established. So there's system value, system capacity. This is the number of potential users, and then a connection fee. And so we have a total system value. We estimate the amount of potential growth within the system, and then you basically divide the two, and you end up with a per unit cost per growth. So that's actually kind of a good place to stop. Any questions so far on the rate comparison and the connection fee comparison?
Anybody got anything? Apparently not. Peter, go ahead.
Okay, we'll keep rolling. So the connector agreements we talked about just briefly. So we're doing a thorough review of these connector agreements and trying to find common elements. And we're also making sure that we're tying that to our sewer billing to ensure that we're capturing the revenue that we should be. Additionally, we're looking at ways that we can streamline those agreements and make them as consistent as possible, and then maybe have unique provisions that are in the order of one page unique provision specific to a particular connector agreement, as opposed to a completely different agreement. And so I don't expect you to read this. This is the tool that we're using that is the distillation of the analysis of each one of those agreements to try and find that commonality, while at the same time finding those unique differences per agreement. So this is a piece that's in progress. This is important because this is how we will translate the connection fee, largely for the wastewater plant, through Englewood to the connector districts. And so that's how we can capture that revenue to continue to fund South Platte Water Renewal Partners. Okay, cost of service rate and rate development. So the cost of service study, essentially what it does is it's looking at what is the cost, basically is what it costs to provide water service and sewer service to our customers. We use there's industry accepted approaches for this, and that's what we base it on. We also look at different customer class to ensure there's equity across those customer class, and then ultimately developing the rates. The rate structure itself, we're looking at how to simplify the rate structure. We still have the flat rate water rates that are out there. That is something that has been an ongoing issue for years, that does cause issues with our equal application of rates. We're looking at alternative rate structures to try and mitigate for that, and then ultimately evaluating a capital improvement fee as a way to potentially help define funding for that reinvestment. So the financial plan projects levels of revenues required, and so here are the expenses on the left, and then the sources on the right. And so you can see it's all our operations and capital and reserves and debt, and then ultimately rate, connection fees, loans, and reserves. That's how we fund things. And so what we're facing is what we discussed in the master planning process is we have deferred maintenance and a lower level of capital investment that has been a pattern over the last few decades, to the point where the master plan identified over the next 10 years about $120 million of capital investment required, and the sewer was $96 million. And then the $96 million does include the total amount of for South Platte Water Renewal Partners, so that includes the part for the connector districts as well. So if you're comparing back to the presentation on the master plan, that number looks slightly different because the master plan is specific to Englewood residents, whereas that number is the total Englewood responsibility through the connected agreements as well. So basically, there are a few different approaches to how you can fund things. You can do it all with cash. You can do it all with debt, or you can do a combination of the two. The issue with cash is it oftentimes creates extreme rate pressure. Debt, you just continue to accumulate debt, and then you get to a point where all you're doing is debt service coverage, and you're never really, you're never really paying anything off. And then this optimized approach of the combination of the two is really, that's the more complex financial way to look at it, because as you really get into the time value of money and rates versus timing of projects and investment today versus investment 5 years from now, you can actually leverage more value out of the money if interest rates are really low than if you had cash finance. And so that's something that we look at as a municipality to ensure that we're getting the best bang for our buck across the board long term. And so what we did is we went through an iterative process. This is where Steve has done a lot of work over the past several weeks, and he and I have met a few times on this, where the master plan identified about $96 million in costs, and we went through and looked at some of the generalizations that they brought forward in terms of costs of projects and programs, and looked at them and said, we can bring that in house. If we hire a staff person, we can do it more efficiently and effectively. So we further refined their proposed cost to help us blend the contracting things out to consultants and contractors with the in-house staffing and trying to find that optimized place where we're not hiring too many staff in-house, but we're also not contracting everything out, which is more expensive. And so this is the summary panel from the financial planning software, which we'll get a demonstration of here shortly. And you can see with the original master plan as defined, what this does is it shows us what rate increases would be required over the next 10 years in order to fund it. These ratios here are ratios that we look at from their debt coverage ratios, essentially. And so we have targets associated with those ratios. And so when it starts to get yellow, that's when we need to be aware. If they turn red, then we've got a problem with coverage ratios. Something else that we're doing is we're slowly building up reserve targets. That's the green line. So right now we don't have an operating reserve target. And so the thought would be over the next couple of years, we'll try to get 1 month and then move into 2 months, then ultimately get to a point where we have a 3-month reserve. But we build into that over the course of the next 6 years. And then you can see it gives a summary of the total quarterly bill. And then we broke that down into a monthly bill. So right now in 2020, the monthly residential sample bill for sewer is $23.50. And at 5.5%, it goes to $24.79. You can see what that. So that's if we just implemented rate increases based on the master plan. So then we refined the master plan, which allowed us to bring down those rate increases a little bit to the point where we're 5% and under, which from just a targeting perspective is oftentimes where we like to stay under 5% if possible, because it's something that over time people just get used to that being a cost of year over year, as opposed to these large spikes of 20% and 30%, and then 0% for 4 years, and then there's another spike. You can see what we try to do is we try to smooth it so that it's not something, it doesn't become a surprise anymore.
Good.
And so for the water, we'll do the same thing for the water. For the master planning, we had 120 million. For refined, we're at 95 million. You can see some of the things that we did. So we did a reduced lead service line replacement program. And then we looked at one that had no lead service line replacement program, just to start to see the effects of what that program actually costs. What we ultimately ended up doing from an optimized perspective is right now we spend $130,000 a year on lead service lines, and that's on an as needed basis as people replace their lines and we have to replace a portion of it. Or if it's part of another project and we need to put some funding towards it. At 5 years from now, I think it's 2026, actually, so 6 years from now, that's when we estimate that there might be regulations that would be affecting Englewood.
Excuse me, Director Van Ry.
Yes,
Mayor Olson has her hand up.
yes.
It's always fun to put my hand up. I never get to do that on the city site. Cheryl's laughing at me. Are we going to get these slides? Can you send them to us, or is it too big? Or
Well, you'll get a in the packet on the we can give them to you, but we're going to have this is an in progress set.
okay,
And so we will have a full set of all of this probably, and it will be expanded out beyond this for the council meeting on the 22nd. So
Okay,
we can
great.
send a copy of this. It's just more of an advanced copy, realizing that there'll be more.
it'll change. Okay, great. I don't know if you heard early, but I have to go to another a work meeting at 5:30. But this is great info. I don't. Have you put something out recently? Because I got 2 calls today from non-Englewood citizens, others who are in our utilities area, and that are very upset about the rate increases. And when I look at this, I just think I just want to send them this chart.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful, just simple comparison.
Yeah, one of them hung up on me, but
Yeah, well, we actually haven't sent anything out yet.
well,
We
I
haven't done
wondered why
anything
they
official.
called out of the blue like that. So I just thought, did something go out or okay?
Yeah, not
Sorry
sure.
to leave you all, but thanks for what you're doing.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. We'll see you next month.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Director Van Ry,
Yes,
we have Councilmember Wink's hand up.
yes.
Thanks. Peter, I do think it would be helpful to at least Linda and I to have this, even though it'll see marked changes between now and the week before the 22nd when we have to go over it with you.
Sure.
I think at least Linda and I can lend a lot more to the conversation by having this contiguous piece in between and your presentation today. So if you don't mind, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. I have no problem sending it out. Just realizing that you'll see it change
Yep.
slightly.
That's fine.
But we'll get it out to the whole board. That's no problem at all.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and I would have had it as an advanced copy, except for C1 and I were working on this about an hour ago. So it's very current information.
hot off the presses. No
It
problem.
is hot off the presses, but I think we'll definitely get it out. Okay, so back to lead service lines. The master plan assumed a program where in 2026 we'd start investing $2 million a year in a lead service line program. We don't even know if that's the right rate, but we want to wait for. We need to figure out what the magnitude of the problem is. As you recall from the master plan, we estimated it could be anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 lines, and so we're not, without a concerted effort to figure out the magnitude of the problem, we're really guessing at what the cost could be. And so it's hard to build a financial plan off of something that's such a guess. And so we tried to be reasonable in our estimation. Our refined approach, we actually dropped that to $1 million, which means we're attacking the problem, but we're not doing maybe like Denver where they're replacing all their lead service lines over the course of a short period of time. If there's a goal at some point, in the next few years where there's a goal of the community to actually follow more of the Denver model, and maybe we could potentially find different funding and things like that, that's when we would go back into these financial models and refine the approach. Okay, so the water master plan. So if we cash fund the original master plan, you can see basically what happens is we go from 2298 in 2020 to 2297, and that's because we're spending down our fund balance. And then by the time we hit 2022, we need to have rates go up 100%. And then they go up the next year 66%. But you can see what the total monthly bill does. Is it doubles and then it goes up to 76, and by the time you get all the way out to 2030, it's $92. And so, and you can see it's not smooth and consistent. So you get to 2024, it's 0%, and then it's 10%, 10%, and then 0 and 0. So that's not how we like to do rate increases because again, people can't plan for it.
Right.
So this is where we look at, you know, a cash and debt financing approach, and it still smooths, it's still pretty good size rate increases at 12% all the way through. And then by the time we get to 2029, we get through a slug of projects and we're back down to 4. And you can see what that total monthly bill did is it went to 61. So it went from 92, 68 to 61.35. 10 years, and then that's 10 years from now. You get to rate plan 3. This is with the reduced service line. We had refined some projects and pushed them forward. We think there are some projects that the master plan had delayed too far, so we brought them forward, which is why you see this initial increase of 16, and then it goes to 11%, and you get down to 58. So we're still, in 10 years, you're coming down a little bit more, and then, I went too far. And then this is if we do that minimum lead service line of $1 million a year, and you can see still, as we get farther out, it drops down to 9.5% and 3. And then the total monthly bill 10 years from now, and this is for water only, is about $55. And so what we looked at was instead of doing just it's hard for people to equate what a rate increase actually means because a percent seems worse than what the dollar amount may actually be. And so one of the ways, and it's hard to connect a percentage to identified, you know, project. And so what we looked at was coming up with a capital improvement fee. And so this is, it's something that we highlight on the bill that's like a water infrastructure reinvestment fee or something like that. So that people see that defined dollar amount and they know that it goes specifically to fixing the infrastructure, which has been the issue, as opposed to buried in the overall rate and there's no real way to separate it out. And so that's a way that you can help the customer link clarity between the investment and the increase, and then it's a dollar amount. And so when we did that, we looked at a $12 a month capital investment fee in the billing. And so you can see the first year that there's a substantial increase because this is the point in time where we're catching up to some degree from lagging for so long. But then if you look out here at 2030, the bill actually ends up being lower in the long run because it's at $47 a month. And that's because if you look up here, we can keep the rate increases essentially at 4.5%, and it's very smooth, it's very predictable, it's very it's something that can be budgeted for. And so this is where we're steering towards in terms of optimization. There is a need for investment. I think there's a growing understanding of that need, and this is a way that you can actually tie the cost to that actual need. And so I'm going to turn this over to Siwan, who is actually going to show you some of the inner workings of the model and show you how we can actually look at a multitude of scenarios. So I will stop sharing. And Siwan, if you want to share your screen, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Yes. Let me share my screen. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so please let me know if you can see my screen.
We can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so like Peter said, this is the panel that we're currently showing, and this is basically where we've been getting all the screenshots for all the different scenarios we've been running. We have actually have two financial models, so one for water and then one for sewer. This is the water fund model that we're looking at currently. There's a lot of tabs in this model, but basically what it is a lot of inputs that we've captured since we started working on this rate study. We've tried to capture as detailed information as possible, starting with the beginning fund balance for the city. And I can make it a little bigger, actually.
Good.
Starting with the beginning balance of the city, and then I'm going to jump a few tabs, and I'm just going to go through some of the key inputs of the model. And then we also want to capture all the different revenue sources by line item for each of the fund, for the water fund, and then we capture it historically, the past 3 years, and then the budget for 2020. And then the reason why we want to capture historical is so that we can kind of compare between what we budgeted for that year and how much did we actually hit for that year. So with 3 years of budget versus actual, we can look at variance, we can look at trends to help us better forecast for future years.
Excuse me, Siwan.
Yes.
Councilmember Wink has her hand up.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you. So I'm not asking to go over these other tabs in great detail, and sorry to stop you where you were, but do you mind just reading the titles of a couple of the other tabs for me to get a bigger picture of what types of inputs occur on this, even just for this example on this sheet?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely. So this is, we're on the revenue tab currently, and then what this means is, so some of the
some of the names of the tabs other than revenue.
Yeah, the tabs down below.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, so the revenues, and then we have expenses, and then we have transfers. In this case, City of Englewood does not have any transfers, and then we have escalation factor. So this is kind of a inflation factor we like to apply for future years to account for inflation, any debt service payments that the city is currently paying, and then finally another key input is the CIP, which is the Capital Improvement Program.
Thank you.
So this is the information that is a large part of the information that came from the master plan.
Yeah.
So the Hazen sent their output from the master plan. Stantec moved it into the model, and then that's what feeds those summary panels.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Suan.
Yep, certainly. Yeah, so with all of those inputs, and then we come back to the panel after the initial model input. This is where we always like to come back to see how everything fits together. So we have a pretty good idea where the city is starting in terms of beginning balance, how much revenue that we're bringing in, what are the type of operating and maintenance costs we're expecting every year, what is the capital improvement plan looks like, and then we come back to this panel where we have everything pulled together. So starting from the top is the rate plan, so that would be the rate adjustments. And then Peter mentioned that the next two are the debt service coverage requirements. So these are some of the restrictive things that we are working with to make sure that regardless of which scenario we're going with, we are meeting the city's financial targets. And then down here in this little area, these are just different scenario management, which allows us to run different scenarios, whether if we are thinking about cutting CIP, whether if we're thinking about maybe moving CIP or delaying CIP, maybe we are thinking about adding some additional FTEs or cutting some additional FTEs. This is the panel we come back to for those additional scenarios. And then lastly, you've seen that in the presentation, we try and capture the quarterly and the monthly single family bill. And then down below here are some of the graphs we're presenting. So the top 3 graphs are more focusing on, so for the first one, we're looking at the operating fund, ending fund balance. So how are we using our cash over the year? So we can see that in 2021, because we have a really huge capital needs, so we're actually dropping our fund balance significantly to fund some of those projects. And then in the later years, we are trying to keep it at the target, which is the black line, and that is we're trying to establish a operating reserve over the years. And then the next 2 graphs, we like to look at it all together. They are summarizing for every year for the next 10 years, how much are we spending in terms of O&M operating, how much are we paying for debt, are there any other expenses or revenues. So these are these two charts. And then one thing that I would like to point out, and something that we are looking at when we're going back and forth looking at the scenarios, is this red shaded area, which is the debt service payments. So we can see that with that big capital needs or capital improvement plan that we have, in order to fund it, and then we actually are projecting borrowing, and then this area shows what are our annual debt service payments to fund all those capital.
And you can see the borrowing in the chart below. And so every time you see that bar on 27, and then you go to the top, and you can see that the red gets larger.
Yep, exactly.
Siwan, can I jump in for just another?
Sure.
So one of the things on this is, and this is one of the things I look at, is you can see how that red, it continues to increase. Well, long term, I don't want that to continue to increase and increase and increase and just get bigger and bigger and bigger. I want it to get to a point where it flattens, and then you have a somewhat of a constant distribution between cash finance and debt finance. And so if it continues to grow and grow and grow and grow, then we end up at a point in time where we have so much debt that all we're doing is funding debt coverage. If we can find that optimized place where we have a good blend of cash and debt, then we'll always see the red, but it won't necessarily be a constant growth. It'll grow, and then it'll go down a little bit, and it'll go up a little bit, but it'll stay more stable across there. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yep. Okay, and then we just have these three bottom graphs that are focusing on the capital. So over on the left is what we're projecting for our capital spending. So that's the if we're going with the original master plan, that's a total of $120 million for the next 10 years. So we have the spending, and then the middle chart actually summarizes how we're funding it. So we talked about we can fund, cash fund all the projects, or we can debt fund all the projects, or we can do a combination of the two. And then this chart shows that in 2021, it's all cash because we have the fund balance available to do that. And then in the later years, it's a mix of cash versus debt, and then towards the later years we're actually debt financing a pretty significant amount of those capital needs. And then this borrowing graph that Peter was mentioned, we just set it to bundle every 3 years because we know that it's probably not realistic for the city to go out to debt finance every single year and borrow money. So we just bundle them every 3 years. Any questions so far?
Doesn't seem to be.
Okay, great. I'm going to go into a little bit of the scenario manager, and then you can see that there's a lot of toggles. And then what it does is when we go back and forth in terms of the different scenarios, we've come up with a pretty big set of scenarios that we've been working with, whether if we are looking at, so this one, CIP adjustment specifically, there's a toggle for no or yes. So if it's a no CIP adjustment, that means we're going with the original master plan. And then just for demonstration purpose, I'm going to turn that to no. And then I'm going to refresh. And then I'm also going to take this out for 1 second. Okay. And you can see that there's a little iteration at the bottom. Okay, so the model has updated. And what this is telling us is that under the current rate plan where we have that 4.5%, we are saying, okay, instead of the revised CIP, what if we're going with the master plan CIP? And then we can see that our fund balance is projected to drop and even below zero starting in 2023, 2024. So what that really shows is that, okay, so the 4.5% is not going to fully fund the master plan projects. So then what we typically do is there's two ways of doing it. We can either clear this override. We typically use this override so we can have a more smooth rate increases. But if I take it out and then I am going to hit calculate again. And then you can see that these rate increases here changed. And then if I'm going to flip back to the bottom, so what this model did was that the model actually went in, calculated the rate increases every year needed to fund the level of CIP that we've specified, while also meeting our target.
Excuse me, Swan.
Yes.
I have a question from Councilmember Wink.
Okay.
Surprise. Thanks. So if you can scroll back down, please, to
the graphs.
The graphs down below. Yeah. So are you saying you're pleased with the CIP spending, which still dips below, still goes into debt, what, 2021?
So in this instance, we're not pleased with this run.
Yeah, this would tell me that that funding the master plan, 4.5 steady, it's not good, nor is this variable, and as you said, not steady or continuous change over time of the percent rate. So this would tell me that you need to go to a different plan, right?
Right, and so that's exactly what we do when we're on the calls, is we say, okay, so let's look at this, or let's change this input or this input. And we've had a number of calls where we've been working through these scenarios to get to those optimized scenarios that we showed you. And we'll ultimately get to that optimized scenario as a starting point. And so, and really that's how we ended up with the blend of the 4.5% and the $12 a month.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. And look at that CIP funding the operating cash debt, that looks horrible.
Yeah, and so that's what's great about these charts is I again, that expense by type one, where it just keeps going up and up and up and up, and you can see how much we're funding debt, and it just keeps going up. That's where we want to remain more level, I think. I mean, we're gonna ramp it up to a point where I think it's blended well. I mean, that's what we would propose, is we'd ramp it up to where it's blended well, so you have a good blend of cash finance and debt finance, but you don't want it to just continue to increase, because then you ultimately get to a point where you're just behind again.
So you really need to convince council that the combination of the two will allow us to optimize our large capital needs best. I mean,
that is one of the many things that we need to. Well, I mean, it's one of the many things that we need to explain to council. I think more than anything is that one thing right now is we're looking at federal loan programs and things like that have really, really good interest rates. And
that was
so,
my question. Yeah, what are you presupposing as the funding sources behind your thought here? So this is perfect. Okay.
Yeah, so there's a program. It's called WIFIA, and it's Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act. And it went into it basically, I think it was 2014 is when it came into an existence. And essentially it's got really favorable terms for water and wastewater systems across the country to borrow money to help fund their infrastructure needs. And I think the interest rate right now is hovering around 1.9 to 2% for large sums of money. And so in parallel to all this, we're working with another segment of Stantec actually, to help us at least get our notice of intent in, that we want to be able to be considered, because it's an annual funding cycle. And so there's a whole process by which it takes a year to get to the point where you can be considered for this kind of loan. But once you're in this kind of loan program, then you get there's really favorable terms. There's really you don't have to take the money. You can take whatever you need, and then if you decide not to take it, you don't take it. There's a lot of flexibility. It does require matching funds, so they'll fund 49% of a project or a program. And so part of it is how we package the program so that we cash finance some of our projects, and then we make sure the percentage works out so that 51% is cash financed and 49% would be covered by the WIFIA.
Okay.
So that's just one loan program that we're looking at.
Yeah. One loan program of several loans, and then we have other types of funding sources that we're going after as well.
Exactly.
You'll have all of this to share with us on the 22nd?
Probably not all of it. I mean, we're at the initial. I think what we can share is we can share the other avenues that we're exploring in parallel.
Yeah.
And we can list those things out. So we're looking at grant applications. So we talk about the USBR grant application process. There's also the Colorado State Revolving Fund money that's out there, which is loans that the city has taken in the past.
Yep.
There's this WIFIA funding, and ultimately, you know, depending on the bond market, I've been in utilities that have gone straight to the bond market, and so there's a whole different. When you start to get looking at the blend of funding sources, it just amplifies in complication.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. All right, wonderful. That is exactly what I needed. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, Siwan?
Yes. Yeah. And then of course, depends on the different loan term, it will affect the cost of issuance, and then also the debt service payments, and then potentially our debt service coverage that we have to meet. And then another thing that I wanted to throw out there is that what we did, specifically looking at the CIP funding, and I think so currently we're saying that we're going with the original master plan. And then I also want to go back to where we landed at. So I'm going to go with the revised CIP. So I'm going to say yes, CIP adjustment, and then bring back that $12 capital improvement fee. And then so you can see the impact of how much of a different funding mix that we have in terms of how much we're debt funding versus how much we're cash funding.
And so that's where you do the 4.5% override on that. Siwan, there's another thing I want to, so we have, another thing that's out there is we have a strong water portfolio that Englewood's historic approach has been more of a protectionist approach to the portfolio to ensure that there's no downstream users that are going to hurt our water rights. And so we still want to do that. At the same time, we want to look at ways that we can potentially leverage it for additional revenue. And so on that scenario manager, there's a spot in there for an input for if let's say we're able to figure out some new agreement out there where we can generate $1 million more a year. And so Siwan can plug $1 million in, and then you can see what the effect on what that ultimate effect is on how much that can potentially help rates go down, or, you know, help us build up better reserves or advance projects. And so this is a different feature that we've customized into this, into our plan, because we think there's potential there. And so we're exploring that potential. And I think that, you know, the ability to dedicate resources to focusing on that, I think is a good investment for us as a city to start to get in-house capacity to be able to look at our portfolio and look at ways to leverage it to generate more revenue off of it. And so we built that ability in the scenario manager. And so if you run that scenario, C1, it can show that it potentially reduces rates at that point in time, correct?
Yep, That is correct. So originally, without the additional revenue sources of $1 million a year, we're working with 4.5% and $12 monthly cap improvement fee like Peter presented. So with the $1 million, I'm going to see if we can drop our 4.5% even down to 4%. So I just changed the override up here, and then I am going to rerun the model. So if I go down here, we can show that we're still meeting our target for the next 10 years. We're actually still cash funding a lot of the projects, a little bit less in those future years, but we're cash funding a lot of them in the next few years. Our debt service payments, it's about a fourth to a quarter to a third of our total expenses annually by 2030. And
Siwan, can you go back down?
go back down. Yep.
Yeah, to that bottom graph. So you see on that center one, the CIP funding, where there's more green in there. That when I start to see that starts to feel better in terms of that seems like a nicer blend. And so so that's where again that ability to further find additional revenue, I think the potential's there. And I think that it's definitely a shift in terms of strategic approach to our water rights portfolio. I think we can still protect it while at the same time leveraging it to generate more revenue.
Excuse me, Director Van Ry, we have Council Member Wink who has her hand up.
Yes.
I'm sorry, guys. Thank you. So yeah, when you talk about leveraging that water resource, I get a little queasy in the tummy, but I do think you're right, and I think as a whole, I think within the city we have a lot of room to grow in terms of management and really leveraging some of the assets. I do think it's smart to start here. How soon might you have some scenarios that we can look at, Peter, to consider? I mean, it's one small component, but can really add a huge difference. I mean, we're looking at potential changes based on just $1 million as just an example. And I'm imagining we could bring in a lot from that. Might you have some scenarios for us in terms of how we could maximize the value of that, our water, for potentially lower fees?
Yes, we are working on. We're at the initial stages of developing that potential strategy moving forward, and I think that one of the things that would really help us in that plan is that development of that engineering department within utilities to be able to focus on water resources and focus on program development and grant application. And then if we do end up with WIFIA funding or these other funding mechanisms, that those funding mechanisms take work to be able to comply with the requirements of the loan from a federal perspective. And so I think one of the things that is absolutely paramount in terms of being able to apply to be able to move forward with this type of strategy is we got to get some in-house resources in order to, I need someone on staff that can dedicate their time to looking at to knowing the water resources and portfolio inside and out, and understand where the points are that we can potentially leverage it for more revenue, and then go out and seek to develop the agreements with potential other jurisdictions or other agencies to enter into an agreement. So those agreements generally take a couple of years sometimes, but at least starting to get to that point where we can dedicate time and energy to that. Right now, our biggest restriction is just in-house capacity.
And
excuse me, Director Van Ry, we have Cheryl.
Oh, I'm still here. Thank you, Larry.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So given this board, this water and sewer board is one of the quasi-judicial boards. I mean, I'm probably not the person who should be asking this, but I can't help myself. is there some, can this board lend you added support to build up your engineering capacity, you know, by the time, so that when you get to council, we have the backing and the additional sort of layer of, I don't know, endorsement. I'm just wondering what this board can do to further support you other than listening to you.
Well, I think, you know, if the board, and then I would defer to the board chairman and Chairman Wiggins on this, but if what we're, so in these models is an assumption of staffing up that's built in. So financially, we've built it in. And that
Right.
goes back to that optimized CIP. And so this assumes that there is that ramping up, and that we're hiring a project manager, project engineer, a water resources manager. We're staffing up at the plant that's running, you know, razor thin right now in terms of operations staffing. So we built that into the model over the next couple years. If the board sees this and says, hey, this is a good strategy, then I would defer to the board in terms of, you know, your Chairman Wiggins, your interpretation and your thoughts.
As I listen to it, I can follow it, and it looks pretty good. I would say on a portfolio, going out and working something with some other agencies, I'd be real reluctant to lose any of our rights. We would not want to lose anything along that line. You get me there?
Absolutely.
Okay. Other than that, I think you're on the right trail here.
Yeah, the underlying water right is the most valuable piece.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to lose that.
That's correct.
Nor do we want to
deal it away.
Nor do we want to neglect opportunities to maintain the strength and the right and that protectionist historic sort of view of our water right, as Peter's saying, where we can earn some serious money. So
Agreed.
yeah, I look forward to seeing what Director Van Ry can share with us. I'm sure you do too, Chair Wiggins.
Right, I agree. Okay.
And Councilmember Wank, I think to your original question of can we bring scenarios, I think we're a few months off on that. It's probably something more towards, you know, the fall or towards the end of the year. That part of it is really just understanding our water rights portfolio and understanding where the opportunities are, because it's very complex.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that if we're proposing a strategy, that it's a well thought out strategy that's smart, that doesn't necessarily cause us longer term harm.
And this fall, that timing does align pretty well with what we've discussed so far in terms of 2021 to 2025. And what we've seen here, right? So that doesn't deter anything. We're still in line with the rollout of the water and sewer plan, project plans.
Yes, and so what this, basically the way I've held any of that leveraging in the water rights portfolio is I've not included any of that additional revenue into the scenarios that we're proposing, because it's not guaranteed yet. Right. So really at that point in time, if we strike an agreement in 18 months with another district or another provider, then we can go back into this real-time usable model and put that new revenue in, and then see what it does to our rates over the next 10 years. And that's the beauty of this iterative model that we have.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Siwan, do we have anything else that we want to cover on the model?
I just have one last thing, and it shouldn't take long at all. So I am going to unhide one of the rows. And one of the feature we've been looking at, Peter, I know sometimes when we go back and forth, is we can bring in a last plan. So this model enables us to save one plan, and we can call it as the last plan and compare it against the current plan. So that way what is really useful is not only we can compare the rate plan, but also we can look at what does it mean to a customer's bill. Yeah. And then currently the last plan is without the capital improvement fee, and then the current plan is with the capital improvement fee. Yep. I think other than that, I don't have anything else, Peter, unless you want to see anything or anyone else have any questions.
No, I think that was outstanding, Siwan. I'm glad that actually, you know, I always get nervous when we do these real-time model things, but this worked really, really well. So thank you.
Great.
I think I want to just, I think convey to the board and ultimately when we go to council is that that we're trying to look at this from a longer term strategic approach that really looks at all aspects of it financially, so that we don't get into a bind into the future, and we know what the future looks like. And I think you can see by the complexity of the model, which this model has been used across dozens of other water and wastewater districts, and it really is powerful what it does in terms of helping us plan and adjust plans and scenario plan and those kinds of things. So thank you for the demonstration.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. And then, right, does that show up for everybody? Back to the PowerPoint.
We're on, yes.
Okay. And so really we are down to, so we looked at those optimized scenarios. And so when you look at the optimized sewer and the optimized water, this is how that compares. So that's the 4.5 or the 5% in sewer, and then the 4.5% in water plus the $12 capital reinvestment fee. And you can see at that point in time, we are no longer lowest, but we are still second lowest in the front range, really being only a few dollars off from Littleton, which is our neighbor. And they're actually going through a similar type of process here to look at their rates and fees as well. So we may not be actually, so I guess the point is we're still well below the average. And that's where I think some of the positive out of this is we're not facing, again, the kinds of things that Roxborough and Castle Pines and Parker are facing. We're facing somewhat of a course correction and an adjustment to reinvest in our systems. And that's largely the message I think that we're showing, is that we're still an extremely high value city to get water and sewer service from. And a lot of that goes back to you know, that work that was done way back at the beginning of the century and developing that water system the way it is. So our next steps are, we're going to go to council to present this expanded version, very similar type of presentation. We'll round out a little bit more information. And then essentially we'll take input from both this board and from council on what you'd like us to go back and look at from a scenario perspective. And then we'll come back to the board, and we'll come back to the council, likely in the July timeframe, I would say. July, August timeframe, it all depends on timing of meetings. And then incorporate that feedback just to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. We're going to finalize the connection fees and miscellaneous fees. We'll do any updates to the financial plan, and then we go into actual rate development, which is a whole different part of this, which is rate design, which is less involved, but still an important piece of this. And then ultimately a final presentation and report, probably in this, we're not sure yet, but the September timeframe, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that whatever we do through the course of the summer is leading us to October budget timeframe, so that if we are making any adjustments in rates, we're doing that in parallel with the budget process, because that budget that we'll propose will be based on whatever we ultimately decide on from a rates perspective. And that is the end of my presentation. So I would open it up to any feedback, discussion, questions, thoughts I look forward to hearing from the board.
Anybody at the board wish to question? Comment? How about Mr. Moore? How you doing, John?
I'm doing just fine, thank you.
Okay. Even though we can't see your picture, you're all right. Okay. Well, I guess if nobody has anything else,
Mr. Wiggins?
yes, Caitlin.
I'm just wondering, are you looking, when you guys are comparing rates, are you looking how each utility is, like their structure of how they charge their customers on water usage?
Yeah, so what we're looking at is, so I'm going to share my screen again. And go back up. Oh, well, wait. So what we look at here is, so we try to create an apples to apples comparison. And so what we look at is 6,000 gallons per month usage. And so that's a pretty steady, middle of the road, wintertime usage is about 6,000 gallons for a normal family. These charts look very different when you're talking about July timeframe, and you have these other entities that have these tiered structures that as you start to use more irrigation, your bills go up even substantially more. That's something that that's the rate design piece that we'll be looking at next, in terms of, we're actually a declining rate structure. So as you use more water, your cost of water goes down, which is generally pretty opposite of what the front range is, because it doesn't really encourage conservation. And it also doesn't just align with the newer cost of water, I guess, for lack of a better term. And so that will be something that we look at to try and come into line with basically how the front range applies rates. And so we try to baseline it almost as much as we can, apples to apples, on a residential base. And so if there's a large commercial base or something like that, we haven't looked at that. This is based on a single family residential, 6,000 gallons per month. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, for the most part. And then also, as far as, oh, hold on, I think I may have lost my second question. Yeah, never mind. It's gone.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else on the board have anything? Anything you would want to discuss with Peter or his staff that he's presented this evening? All right. If not,
Sorry.
Caitlin, you
I remembered
your
it.
question?
And then as far as billing, have we, or we may not be in the phase yet, but have we considered possibly billing monthly? Is that a norm, or is that different? Because I feel like people would be able to digest higher costs if they're getting, a monthly bill, so it's, not hitting them quarterly.
Yes, that's exactly what we're looking at.
Okay.
And frankly, most, it's rare to have quarterly billing anymore. They're mostly monthly bills. That's why we do a monthly bill comparison. The finance is working on, they're actually demoing new billing softwares right now. And that's one of the changes that we will likely recommend, is to go to monthly billing. Because at this point in time, you can budget for $60 a month, but when it goes to, when it's 180 every 3 months, then it definitely feels like a bigger hit. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. And of course, again, and I had another question, now it's gone. So maybe it will come back or it won't. So sorry.
Isn't it nice to get senior moments, Caitlin?
Oh yeah, I get them all the time. I think they're contagious.
You're right.
Once my parents started getting them, I got them. So.
Right. All right, Cheryl, did you have something? I thought I saw your hand up there.
You did see it up.
Okay.
I almost feel I've talked enough. I just wondered if the board was planning anything to provide to City Council. Joe, if I'm over speaking, please let me know. But I don't know. John, how long have you been on this board, if I might ask? More?
Longer than I can count.
Right, that's what I thought. Have we typically provided documentation to council in a scenario like this?
Not to my recollection, but I welcome a challenge or if someone remembers differently, but I don't recall. So it's usually if there was a real concern, we'd be raising it. But anyway, I don't believe so. But I might be wrong.
I just want to have every chance possible to make sure we make the right decision. But I'll have faith. Thank you. I really don't have any other questions, Chair Wiggins.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Well, I guess, folks, that's going to be about it for this evening. If we have nothing else, this board is adjourned, and thank you for your participation, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you,
All right,
Peter.
thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. See you all next month.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Thank you, everybody.